Good morning, everyone. My name is Joshua Berg. I was asked the question, how are limitations on students' rights an illustration of the First Amendment in U.S. public schools? This issue is very important considering that there's a huge difference in how people can express their rights within public schools and outside of them. And it's also important for students to understand their rights as well as the limitations placed on them. Students' First Amendment rights are limited in public schools through time, place, and manner restrictions, or TPM for short. TPM restrictions are exactly what they sound like, restrictions on the time, place, and manner of the expression of rights. In order for these TPM restrictions to be considered constitutional, they must follow 4 guidelines. They must serve a government interest, be narrowly drawn, be content neutral, and must provide alternative methods of expressing your rights. The U.S. justice system has used these TPM restrictions in order to interpret the First Amendment in U.S. public schools. One such example of this was in the court case Hazelwood v. Kuhlmeier. In 1983, students published 2 articles concerning teenage pregnancy and divorce. Upon inspection, the principal decided that the 2 articles were not suitable for the school environment and promptly censored both articles. This censorship of the freedom of press was eventually brought up to the Supreme Court. In a 5-3 decision, the Supreme Court actually ended up supporting the censorship of these 2 articles. In this case, the Supreme Court placed a restriction on the freedom of press due to the location being a school. Seeing as how schools are considered as non-public forums, they are allowed to place reasonable restrictions upon students' rights so long as it follows the school's general purpose of education. Another example of time, place, and manner restrictions limiting students' rights is in the case of the Elmbrook graduation ceremonies. In 1999, students at Brookfield Central High School wanted to host a graduation ceremony at the Elmbrook Church. This was permitted by both the school board president and the district superintendent, both of whom were members of the church. The decision to host the graduation ceremony at the church caused a lot of controversy. For one, there's a giant 20-foot cross that loomed over the graduation ceremony. There are also religious literature such as Bibles and pamphlets, all of which created a Christian environment which some students weren't comfortable with. When this was brought up to court, the Seventh Circuit Court decided against the graduation ceremonies being held at the church. They noted that the religious materials present, including the Bibles and the 20-foot cross, went against the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment, saying that Congress shall not respect the establishment of religion. They also noted that there are other suitable locations for the graduation ceremony to be held at, so it didn't have to be held at the church. For these reasons, the Seventh Circuit Court placed a restriction on the place as to where the graduation ceremonies could be held. Some people may say that time, place, and manner restrictions aren't always used to interpret the First Amendment rights, and in some cases, such as Tinker v. Des Moines, this conclusion holds some merit. In 1965, despite being threatened with suspension, students, most notably Mary Beth and John Tinker, wore black armbands to protest the ongoing war in Vietnam. They were suspended for that decision. The District Court and the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals ended up supporting the suspension, so it was brought up to the Supreme Court. In a 7-2 decision, the Supreme Court supported the Tinker siblings' decision to protest the war. They cited that students don't lose their First Amendment rights upon walking on school grounds. They also mentioned that the black armbands represented pure speech, which is protected under the First Amendment. Although TPM restrictions weren't utilized in this case, they weren't necessary in the first place as the black armbands didn't provide a threat to the school's functionality. So what exactly can students do about this? The most important thing that students can do right now is to know their rights. They also need to understand the limitations that are placed on those rights. This is available in many documents that schools and school districts provide. For example, Orange County Public Schools has a students' code of conduct that lists what students can and can't do. Once students understand their rights as well as the limitations, I encourage them to express those rights because everyone has a voice that deserves to be heard. What questions do you have?
All right, first question. Was there evidence that you gathered that you didn't use, and then why didn't you use it?
I found one academic journal talking about how information to students are sometimes limited, such as books due to censorship. I wasn't able to use it mainly for the word count because I wanted to use other sources and I couldn't fit it within the word count.
All right. And what advice would you have for other researchers who consider this topic?
I think the best thing for them to do is to understand the First Amendment rights and then understand how understand the limitations on the First Amendment outside of schools so that you can compare them to the limitations placed within schools.
All right, thanks.